Vinny here. Before this episode, I just wanted to take a minute to let everyone know about the Omaha Roads to Freedom Unconvention. Now, this is going on Friday, May 25th to Sunday, May 27th at the Embassy Suites and Conference Center in La Vista, Nebraska. Speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Larry Sharp, Nick Sarwark, Dr. Lee Heap Merritt, and more. It's going to be a speakeasy-themed costume ball headed by a steampunk band, so that should be interesting. You can go to www.omahaunconvention.com, and if you use the promo code ThinkLiberty, you can get 20% off. Now, on top of that, they just cut their prices, so if you use our code, you can get a ticket for $40, significantly cheaper than it was when it first started. Think Liberty is going to have a table at the Unconvention. You can come and talk to Chris Oglesby and Caitlin Cloven. Being Libertarian is going to have a table there, too, and there's going to be tons of other people in the Liberty world. So don't forget, Friday, May 25th to Sunday, May 27th, the Omaha Roads to Freedom Unconvention. We'll see you there. Hello, and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. This is episode 29. On this episode, we're joined by a special guest, Tristan Herring. How you doing, Tristan?
Hello.
All right, thanks for joining us. We appreciate having you, and we're excited to get down in the weeds here. Also joining us this evening, we have, as you know of, our good buddy Chris. How you doing, Chris?
Oh, I'm just doing great. How about you, Vinny?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for asking. And enough about me. Let's dive into where Tristan came from and exactly why he showed up on our podcast for this episode.
All right. Well, I'll take care of that. As you know, as some of you may know, I handle the Think Liberty Minds account, and that is on minds.com as a new social media platform that is cryptocurrency based. And I ran into Tristan because he had some kind of libertarian leaning views, and we found ourselves kind of in the same place. And I thought he would be a good candidate for the podcast, seeing as we do not have any objectivists within our crew. And I thought he would be a good candidate to platform the idea of objectivism and Ayn Rands philosophy. But how we kind of met ways was over this interesting video that he posted, which it was a response to David Hogg and his protests. And in the wake of yet another school shooting, I thought that it would be a good idea to have Tristan on the show and it kind of go over this video that he posted on Minds, which is a very professional video that he made himself being in high school. So Tristan, do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yes, sir, and thank you for having me. My premise with the video was I saw this. There's a new type of bully that you see in high school, and it's not the kind that shoves you in lockers. It's the kind that if you disagree with them, they'll try and ruin your life forever over just, the petty disagreements that Hogg has. And so when I saw him going after Ann Coulter over her, no, it was Lauren Ingram, sorry, going after Lauren Ingram over her comments and trying to take away her livelihood, it really just infuriated me. So I decided to go after him and make a video in response, because when you thrust yourself into the limelight, you can't use "I'm just a child" as a defense anymore.
Right. And as I remember from in the video, there was a response back to a lot of the criticism that Hogg was facing, is that a lot of these people were adults and, oh no, you can't come after me or you shouldn't come after me because I'm a kid, or the excuse that don't pay attention to David Hogg because he is a kid or a young person. And you being a high school student yourself, you kind of spoke from the same realm of, or similar realm of experience. And is that correct?
Yeah. In 2014, there was a shooting at my middle school. And like David Hogg, I wasn't actually there for it, but I wasn't present that day, but I was still attending the school during that time, if that makes sense. And so, I woke up similar to he did, heard the news, and texting my friends, "Are you okay?" and stuff. So my community's faced that, and everybody in my grade has, even the pro-gun people, that actually reaffirmed their beliefs in the Second Amendment, because it took a security guard running up to the kid and saying, "No, stop," and the kid laid down his gun. But let's say the kid didn't lay down his gun. The security guard didn't have a weapon, didn't have anything to defend himself with, or the students. He could have just kept on going. And so my response to David Hogg was, look, there are other students in your shoes, like Kyle, who is another Parkland survivor that Hogg won't give the light of day to, which just shows that Hogg doesn't actually want to debate any superior, like any, peers of his. He just wants to go after people he disagrees with.
Well, it doesn't seem like he's doing much debating at all. He's just kind of yelling at people from what I've seen. It's a lot of rhetoric. It's a lot of over the top stuff. He likes to call people murderers. He likes to tell people they've got blood on their hands. He likes to say what he's not going to take anymore. And so this is what is interesting to me. And Tristan, you mentioned this, and you were talking about this new kind of bully. And that seems to be exactly what's going on, because, more than anything that I've seen come from these gun debates is people saying, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. The time for talking is over. Right. I don't know if you guys have also seen, I'm sure you have, this rhetoric that's just basically like the time for debate, the time for discussion is over.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard that.
Yeah. That's clapping tweets.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's super bothersome because people like to compare the United States with other places, and it's completely different. In a lot of different ways, our whole incarceration system is much different than anywhere else. We have a lot more of a population, than anywhere else. So the things that they're talking about doing are very potentially dangerous when they're talking about unarming a bunch of people, if that's the route that they're going to take, and it seems like a lot of people want to. I just don't know how else anyone's going to be happy when you hear the things they talk about. Tristan, what are some things that people at your school talk about when they talk about advocating for gun control?
Well, I attend what you would call more of a Republican school, because we live in one of the Republican districts of New Mexico. So it's just the same thing. I have one kid I normally debate with a lot, but he's one of my closest friends, and he normally just has the debate of, we need to make sure we have background checks and stricter gun laws. But as of here, with the students here, I don't typically hear a lot of, let's just confiscate all guns.
Well, so background checks and stricter gun laws. Does he know that there's background checks now?
Oh yeah, the last time I actually had a debate with him was back in 2016. We decided to stop debating before we actually lost our friendship. But when I remember the debate I had with him then was just about assault rifles, and I brought up the old FBI statistic of handgun murders, and it went on for a while, and we just kind of dropped it.
Was he able to define assault rifle? Like was he able to kind of hone in on exactly what he was defining as an assault rifle?
Honestly, I can't. It's been, years since we had the debate. Normally,
sure. I'm just interested. I'm being all nosy over here. Sorry.
Well, I'll give you an insight to our school, and I'll probably I won't get in trouble for saying this. I'm basically graduated at this point, but we have this one group, and there's the people like the guy I just mentioned, who's very friendly, very open-minded, and I can have a discussion with him. And, at the end of the day, we both know that it's just our opinions, and him and his mom, who's a teacher there, are just brilliant people. And then there's the other group of people who are intolerant and who are basically the bullies like David Hogg. And so they more just have that hive mind of, if Trump does something, it's basically Hitler. And so since Trump supports guns, it's basically the Fourth Reich if you support guns. And that's kind of like the general consensus. I remember during the 2016 election sitting at a table.
I mean, but really though, like, does he? Does he though?
Not really.
Well, like, take the guns first. Or whatever such silly comment would indicate that maybe.
Yeah, well,
take the guns first, due process after. Exactly.
Right.
Like,
that's
if I'm not, I'll eat my words. But like, I'm pretty sure that's an exact quote.
Yeah, it was. I think one of the problems is people see Republicans and Democrats black and white, and they don't see other sides. Like, I blew this chick's mind at my school whenever I said, no, I'm not Republican. And she's like, oh, so you're a liberal? And I was like, no, I'm libertarian. And she was like, what's that? And I was like, oh, this is going to be a long discussion. Because people don't see the multiple layers in it. They just see Republicans believe this, Democrats believe this. And so people go, oh, Democrats want better gun laws, and so they'll buy into that. Republicans don't want any gun laws, they'll buy into that, and they don't actually look at what politicians say. They just, oh yeah, Trump's our guy, or yeah, Bernie's our guy. They don't actually look at, what they say.
Yeah, it's a bunch of team sports when it's not really, as the old idiom goes, it's not left versus right, it's authoritarian versus libertarian. So,
exactly.
Yeah. And so if we kind of want to kind of delve into one of the other reason why I wanted you to come on this podcast is you describe yourself as an objectivist and you follow Ayn Rand's philosophy. And you mentioned in our discussion before the podcast that you've received some backlash at your school for voicing, some of that opinion. What is kind of what your fellow students and other teachers think about Ayn Rand?
So you have the camp of people who know who Ayn Rand is and who liked her books but kind of lost, any feelings for it. You have the people who just don't know and don't care. And then you have a whole group of other people who just have a strong hatred for her, even though she embodies what they want, right? A strong female who's speaking her mind, who's fighting ideas she believes to be toxic. They hate on her because she has the wrong ideas. And so whenever I first started reading Ayn Rand's books, I asked my English teacher at the time, this was a couple years back, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm reading The Fountainhead, what do you think? And her face turned sour and she got really irritated with it and saying that Ayn Rand's an awful author and that the books are awful. And I kept reading Ayn Rand's books and kept getting more and more into it. And then she approved of me, but she didn't really care for the fact that I was reading them. And then the more I started expressing my views, I got a couple kids at my school saying, oh, Ayn Rand's the worst. She's the devil. She's awful. She hates poor people. And then I actually posted a picture of me with the book Atlas Shrugged on my Snapchat story. And one guy I met online actually told me to kill myself over it. So,
jeez,
people really hate it because.
So this is interesting to me though. But you said this is primarily then like a Republican type school that you're at.
Yeah, you have the Republicans, and then you have that small, vocal minority of liberals there.
So how do do you get kind of backlash for what you believe in objectivism from pretty much both sides, or is it mostly that small vocal minority?
Well, I kind of dropped a lot of people I used to talk to because toxicity, but the people who know it really do. The Republicans who really know her just call me naive and say that her ideas are just stupid. And then the liberals who know of her and who read her just think she's stupid and that she's evil because she, no welfare. And people don't like that sentiment. They think you need that safety net.
Which is kind of odd because a lot of the Republican talking points, Republican or conservative talking points, have centered around, starting new businesses and being able for it to be easier for people to start their own businesses and keep, what they say, keep their own money, etc. And you think they would treasure Ayn Rand's dialogue along those lines, the businessmen being the most persecuted minority and all that other kind of stuff. I find it intriguing that they would think that the scope of her philosophy would be naive when they could pull a lot from it. You know what I mean?
Well, there's two main reasons why I think conservatives hate her. First of all, a lot of them really love tariffs, right? Trump's a huge tariff guy. And if conservatism's going in the way of, Trumpism, for lack of a better phrasing, then they're going to be supporting tariffs. And then that's not a free market, that's protectionism. So that's the first thing. And Ayn Rand was against any sort of inconsistency. And when you say, oh, I want a free market inside the country, but not outside the country, that's a glaring inconsistency that people don't want to face. And then on the other side, she really, really hit hard on religion, and conservatism really, fights for religion, religion in schools, religion, and while I've been recently debating my own religious views, I never personally felt attacked by her, but a lot of people do. They think of her as just, oh yeah, she hates Christians, she hates this, she hates that.
Yeah, from what there's actually a interview with her on Donahue where she goes into that quite a bit of why she has qualms with Christianity specifically in that interview. And from what I understand, her qualms against organized religion and Christianity specifically is that it was that it's a lot of the same rhetoric that is cited against her, that she thought it was that it was naive, and that why would you make your hero die and things like that. and I thought it was a little bit laughable myself, but
so if we could stick on this for just a minute, while I'm familiar with, I could never say her name. What is it? Is it Ayn? Is that how it's supposed to be said? I always want to say Anne.
Both work. I've heard both pronunciations of it.
It's weird. It's got that Y in there. Yeah. But anyway, I've never really heard. I knew she was opposed to it, but as best I know, she was just kind of like opposed to everything. What? She's super grumpy. So what was her opinions on religion, other than she just didn't like it? Could you give me a little bit more of a little dive on that?
The gist of it is you can't prove that God exists. Therefore, it's irrational to believe in a God. And this is one area where I disagree with her on, because I, for the longest time, was Jewish. I recently converted to agnosticism because I think anybody who tries to definitively say this is the answer, period, that's not the answer, and that you fully don't know. And so for her to say, oh, well, you can't prove a God exists, therefore it doesn't, I think that's making an assumption just like any religion would.
Do you think can I comment kind of on this? Do you think it might be a slippery slope, or maybe even an inconsistency, to build a philosophy off of the establishment that morality is objective, where disowning the possible explanations to that objective morality existing?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I always saw with it. 1 second, my friends are calling me on another site and it's loud. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I always saw that as extremely inconsistent with normally what she says, because I always saw atheism as its own religion. They don't worship priests, they worship scientists. And if you've seen Bill Nye speak, he comes from that idea of, if you don't believe in man-made climate change, you're a heathen, you're a heretic, and we should put you in prison. So a lot of the same arguments you hear from the Catholic Church, you also hear from atheist sectors, and that's something that I kind of objected to with Ayn Rand, was her view on that. And then I normally have an objection to people when it comes with libertarians, more specifically when it comes to abortion too.
So I'm going to go ahead and avoid that abortion comment entirely.
That's
but I do
conversation.
Yeah.
I am curious though. So, I mean, I guess I find it ironic that someone who is so dogmatic in her beliefs would then turn around and kind of wag a finger at someone for being the same way.
Yeah.
Right. Because when you think about it, if we're gonna be honest here, what's the difference between someone deciding that they are going to have faith and believe in a religion and have conviction toward that, versus someone deciding that their moral preference is objectively true for all of life?
Yeah, exactly. That's a sentiment I have to agree with. Like, the more and more I think about all of it, the more and more it's like, well, you can't get mad at somebody else for saying that they know the answers when you're saying the exact same thing. And
that's kind of what I was
right.
Yeah. And so I think that's why we have the free market of ideas, because if you have two people saying that they definitively know the answer, I think you should debate and come to a medium in between. And unfortunately, I don't see that typically happening now. It's just a lot of yelling and a lot of name calling. And that's something that she also wrote about that I disagreed with, which is, if you if people disagree with the tenets of objectivism, they're morally wrong and they're morally evil, and you have to call them out on it. And no, not everybody's evil for disagreeing with you. Like have you ever heard of the artist Rucka Rucka Ali?
I have.
Nope.
Yeah, he's an offensive guy who parodies random songs, and I heard him talk about he's a very not only just he offends people, but he's also aggressive about his views because he's an objectivist and he just attacks everybody. And
he's like the Larkeen Rose of objectivism.
Yeah, and how can you get anybody to agree with your ideas if you're doing that? If you're just attacking everybody who has a slight disagreement with you.
Are you familiar with a lot of other philosophers?
50-50. I tried reading Nietzsche, but a lot of it went over my head. So, but I've been wanting to dabble into it, but this past year I've had a ton of work on my plate, like a ton of reading and stuff in my English class. So unfortunately I haven't been able to get into a lot of that. Most of my scope goes to Ayn Rand and all of that.
Well, you did post a picture on Minds with one of our t-shirts, by the way,
yeah.
Because you won our free giveaway for the month, and I saw you with The Fatal Conceit by F.A. Hayek. So
yeah, thank you for the shirt again, by the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But have you delved into that at all? Any of Hayek's work?
Yeah, that was one of the books I used for my senior project about socialism, and he actually brought up a really good point of this extended market order that I really liked it because it kind of shows there are some things in life that we can't understand and we can't make a better system. And so I think that also destroys the objectivist argument too about it, which is everything can be done rationally. And
yeah, Hayek was good at that.
yeah.
What's most interesting, if you'll notice, so you read The Fatal Conceit, that means you're somewhat familiar with, like you said, the extended market order and how he talks about he kind of goes on to talk about how he sees the market as a form of human evolution, and that's why he believes it should stay free so humans can freely evolve in a spontaneous way, the way that they will evolve, right? But his way of looking at it, there was no objective view of it. So, I mean, while there are a lot of similarities in that they supported a lot of similar things, when you really break it down to the core fundamentals of the philosophies, they're very different.
That's one thing I've been trying to come to terms with, is that whole debate. And again, another problem is you just can't find good debates between two, an objectivist and somebody who follows the school of Hayek. And that's one of the problems I saw with Ayn Rand is there's not many debates with her. There are some where she's like giving her opinion and she's talking down some people in the audience, but there's no just debate between her and another thinker. It's either her saying these people are wrong or people saying she's wrong. And so it's really hard to actually hear two opposing sides, because it's one thing to read a Hayek book and it's another thing to read an Ayn Rand book, but it'd be even better to hear the two voices go against each other and explain why the other one's wrong.
I mean, to be sure, I don't even think that there would. You'd have to be probably pretty well versed in both to be able to debate it, because I mean, what do you like? For the most part, it's going to be like free trade. They're like, keep it free. Individual rights, I'm for them, right? You don't really start to get into the meat and potatoes of the different disagreements until you start getting into some of the more nuanced stuff that's in there. But it sounds like you've broached some of these things and some of these concepts, and you're starting to see a little bit where the rubber meets the road. And that's interesting. All throughout history, there's times where Ayn, God damn it, the Rand lady would be like, I don't know if you've heard the story about her, Mises and Henry Hazlitt. Like they all, I guess, had a dinner date together. Like Hazlitt was able to get Rand to agree to have dinner with everybody, and apparently it just like denigrated into a shouting match.
To be a fly on the wall at that dinner, oh my gosh.
I know, right?
Yeah, but now that we've thoroughly like crapped on Ayn Rand, what are some ways which you think her philosophy actually really does like shine, and is some things for people to take note of and kind of remember a little bit?
Well, one of the things is really just the idea of a A equals A, no inconsistencies. Because whenever you debate, for instance, whenever I debate a lot of conservatives, what it boils down to is they have some sort of inconsistency in their basic principles and their premise. And that's something Ayn Rand says a lot, is check your premises. So they oftentimes like, oh yeah, I support free trade except in this case, or I support this, and I support, you know what I mean. I'm sorry, I'm lost for words right now. So that's one of the things. And another one of the things is her attack on altruism, which is what I really subscribe to, because I don't believe sharing is caring. I believe that if you do something inherently, if you donate to somebody, you get good feeling from it. Every time you do something, there's something in it for you. And to completely diminish that concept leads to things like socialism, because every single toxic ideology comes from this collectivist idea, and the idea that you're your brother's keeper. And that's one of the reasons Rand attacked Christianity so hard, is because the hero did the ultimate selfless act, which is die for everybody. And it's really refreshing living in a world where everybody's telling you you have to live for other people, to hear a voice coming down and saying, no, your main goal in life is to live for you, not for your neighbor, not for your family, but for yourself. And when you work on yourself and when you achieve the best rational, conclusion you can, all those other things will come.
Right. And she really makes the point that, springboarding off of that everyone always goes after their self-interest, like that they have that in mind with everything they do. And no one is completely 100% altruistic in any endeavor. Like, even if you go to Africa to help build wells on like a missionary trip or something, well, did you post it on Instagram?
Yeah.
Did you do it once? Did you brag about it in church when you came back? So then that's a very, very minor example. And that's probably that's one of the probably more altruistic things that people do, but, or donating to charity and not telling somebody about it or something like that. But, the point being is that, let's say you donate to charity and then you write that off on your taxes. Well, that was a part of a motivation of doing so, was that you could, shirk some tax burden by doing that, or she uses the example of like starting a business. I want to get rich. I want to have a bunch of money. So I'm going to start this business, and I need to make more money now because I'm super greedy, and I'm just bad and greedy. And so I'm going to employ all these people to work for me. Okay. All those people have jobs now. So you being greedy somewhat helped the economy,
Exactly. And she also, another key part of her philosophy is really kind of trying to find a good definition for what selfishness is, because everybody just has the worst connotation for it, which is, you're going to go after what you want, but you're going to hurt a bunch of people in the way. And what Rand came out and said is, no, if you're selfish, that doesn't mean you go, a good selfish person won't go out and hurt a million people in their path. They'll go out and they'll do what's best for them. And if they do that, odds are it'll, like you said, give people jobs. It'll help a bunch of other people come up. And that's another thing I really liked, which is that if just because you're selfish doesn't mean you're a bad person. And that's something that I tell people, like, oh, I hate selfishness. And I'll go, well, I'm a selfish person. And they'll go, excuse me? Because there's several times where I pay my friends way or I donate to people. But that's because, if you pay your friends way, they're coming into the experience with you. You're getting an experience from that you wouldn't have had if they couldn't come. If you donate, like my mom donated to a homeless guy, and she said, oh, that's the best feeling I've had in a long time of being selfless. Well, it's not selfless anymore. And that's selfishness. Selfishness isn't, oh yeah, I'm a guy on Wall Street and I just screwed over this other businessman and sent him to jail over false charges, and now I own his business and I got this money through fraudulent means. To her, selfishness meant achieving your own best rational goals and achieving happiness through it.
So this is one of my biggest issues with objectivism, and it's the language. And the reason I take issue with the language used is because as I listen to what you're explaining, that all sounds totally reasonable to me. The problem is that it only makes sense if you read her work. Yeah, I keep tripping up on trying to say her name. I go to say it, and I'm like, Ann. Fuck, the Y.
Yeah, and she shares Rand, with which so many other people share that last name.
Yeah. Right.
It's a made-up name anyway,
yeah.
so,
Right. It's fascinating to me because we're separated in dialogue with other people when you speak about her work by words, essentially by semantics. And I sense this is what the core of a lot of arguments she had with people were about, because she insists these definitions of these terms in her work. I mean, she really does. There's no two ways to describe or define altruism. There's no two ways to describe or define selfishness. And it's, as you say, the problem with me when I listen to that is I agree completely with what you're saying. Is generally when people are kind of looking out in their own self-interest, then better things tend to happen. And especially when you get down into her work and you frame it, because she saw, as you guys talked about, this giving to charity is actually a selfish act because you make yourself feel better, right? So she had all this stuff kind of unpacked in a really reasonable way. The only thing is that when you go out and talk to people, right, people haven't read her work. People aren't as accustomed to being familiar with knowing that selfishness can be all these things. So it kind of, and it even sounds like you affirmed as much with the people that you talked to, it kind of puts you in a position to have to unpack the philosophy to people before you have the discussion with them. Like, no, let me explain to you what selfishness really means.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why people who actually talk to me see me in a completely different light than people who, just hear what I say. Because what I say sounds really coarse, right? Like, oh, I don't, I live for myself. You guys are all secondary to me. But that's not me saying, oh, you guys are worse humans. It's not me saying, oh, I'm inherently better. And then you try and get down into these nuances and you try and unpack it all. And we live in an age where people just want to read a tweet. They just want, they want to log on to CNN or Fox News. They want to hear a 5-second hot take and then get off and repeat that argument. They don't actually want to dig into the philosophy, and that's one of the problems.
Well, that's a bit of a hindrance when the philosophy you support has its own lexicon.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, I hate the fact that she chose selfishness, because if she would have just thought of any other way to phrase it, it would come off completely different to people. But she had to use words that already have the worst connotations. And, kind of what Hayek said, you can't completely restructure society to your liking. You can't completely change the way everybody thinks. And so when you're trying to change the connotation of a word, it never really works. It's like nobody thinks of the word, gay. Nobody sees it as happy anymore. They all see it as the new connotation. And for somebody to write a book saying, oh no, we all have to see gay as its denotation now, or as this one specific one, just doesn't work out. And I think that's one of the problems objectivists need to have. Like egotism, even that's kind of a bad word choice, because again, that gets contributed to people like Kanye West, and it ends up being conflated with narcissism.
Yeah, it's kind of, I would say it's a poor choice of terminology, but it kind of, I think it would kind of go back to her being a fiction writer mostly, and kind of using those ideas to just kind of like spur the reader into like certain types of emotional sets, which is, something done in art and in fiction. I'm not a literary, scholar by any means, but I think I dare say that she intentionally did it, and I think it might just be because she was just naturally an abrasive person, but it might have been a failed attempt to try to be kind of bold. I don't know. I feel like a choice of wording could have been a lot better. That's for sure. As you kind of address the quality of a lot of people think the Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead were being of poor quality for a fiction writer. And one book that I thought by her that I thought was actually, and I actually enjoyed The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, as being, you know, a fiction novel platforming, you know, free market concepts. But the one book that I really did not, I took a lot of issue with was Capitalism, the Lost Ideal, which is supposed to be a companion to Atlas Shrugged. And the reason why is because when it comes to backing up some concepts that she says, she a lot of times references Atlas Shrugged, which is a fiction book, or Alan Greenspan.
Right. Yeah. That's another issue I have too, is that you know, she's and Tristan, I do apologize. I didn't mean to turn this into a Rand shit fest, but
it's fine.
I mean, you know, I was trying to get to the bottom of why everyone hated her so much, so I went straight to the thing that everyone hates her for, and I read that essay, The Ethics of Emergency. Oof. And yeah, I mean, she cites herself more than anything else throughout a bunch of her work. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so the best way to look at Atlas Shrugged is basically the Bible, right? It's the Bible for objectivists, because that's what the Bible is.
Oh,
yeah. If you look at the Bible from a literary perspective, like, have you guys read any of Jordan Peterson's work? Yeah, yes. That's what I'm reading right now. Yeah. It's his 12 Rules for Life, and I've dabbled in his Maps of Meaning book. But what I really like that he does is he takes the literary value of the Bible, not taking it as if it's nonfiction, but taking the stories and what they mean. And I think that's kind of how objectivists view Atlas Shrugged. And then you get into the logical fallacy of appeal to authority. And if somebody doesn't agree with the authority of Ayn Rand, then they're obviously not going to agree with her citing herself. And so while I think the best way to look at Ayn Rand is she's the instigator of these ideas, but she's not the best. Right? She started it, but I don't think she had the capability to really drive it home. And that's why I think we need new discussion, new people, new figureheads and everything. Because really, again, you can't, like you said, you can't cite yourself.
So there are a lot of folks out there. I mean, you know, listen, I will shill the shit out of some Hayek. I think everyone's heard quite enough on this podcast. But I mean, you know, you started reading The Fatal Conceit. That's one of his shorter ones. It's really good, though. I mean, are you familiar with Nozick at all?
The main people I know of are Hayek, Friedman, who I've yet to read, unfortunately, because I haven't had time, and then Rand, and then anybody I just read online. Like, I'm a huge Ron Paul fan, and then, but I've yet to really dig into those classic economists.
Sure. If I could suggest anything, I would suggest Nozick, and I usually don't suggest Nozick. I'm not sure why. He really was brilliant. But he specifically, for some stuff he talked about with Rand, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But man, you know, here we are, Libertarian Book Club again. Thomas Sowell, if you're not familiar with him, he's really good too. The way that he pulls apart data and analytics is really interesting.
Basic economics is like every Chicago or Austrian economist needs to read that book.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah. Wait, what book is it?
Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he's good. His work. He and Hayek both have a way of kind of putting me next to myself when I read their stuff. They really make you second guess some of the stuff that you thought you were super sure of, for lack of a better term. But I wanted to run through something here. I knew we were going to do this, and I wanted to actually do it, if it's okay with you. So Nozick actually had a critique against Rand, and I wanted to know if you guys would be interested in hearing that critique.
Yes, please.
So Nozick was pretty good. He levied a few critiques that were pretty solid. He actually did one against ANCAP that was solid too, and he levied, just like everyone has, against Marxism as well. So this is damn near verbatim here, and he really unpacked it and laid it out in a kind of succinct way. So I'll just unpack it here now. This is him describing Rands philosophy, so he's going to do it at a real super fundamental level. We talked about how important the nuance of her philosophy was when we try to figure out where people diverge, and Nozick really zeroed in on it. So I'll warn you up front, this is going to be a little dry, but I think it's important to get through. So we're going to break this down pretty much exactly as Nozick did. 1. Only living beings have values with a point. 2. Life itself is a value to a being which has it. 3. Life, as a rational person, is a value to the person whose life it is. Okay, so the first section of this is 1. Only a living thing is capable of choosing among alternative actions, or 2. Only for a living being could there be any point to choosing among alternative actions, for 3. Only a living thing can be injured, damaged, have its welfare diminished, etc. And 4. Any rational preference pattern will be connected with the things mentioned in 3. And since 5. Values establish a rational preference, ordering among alternative action, it follows that. 6. Only a living thing can have values with some point to them. Values have a purpose only for living things. Okay, now hang with me. I know this is a little dry. Nozick then quotes a supporting argument from Rand about an immortal and indestructible robot which cannot be affected by anything and thus would not be able to have any values. He raises 2 questions. First, is it necessary for value to be based upon how something is affected? For example, some value the worship of God, and others value admiring talent, even if God and or talented people never learn about it or are affected by it. It is simply an appropriate response to their achievements. Second, is it necessary for value to be based upon how something affects us? Imagine an island I couldn't go to and could not be affected by in any way, but I could still send things to that island. Then, Rand would say, I could not value the people there or their social arrangements by perhaps sending them copies of the book which is morally instructive. Or maybe it is being claimed that not every value in every instance must be connected with oneself being affected, but that for a being to have values, some of the values must be connected that way. If a being became immortal and indestructible, then the values it previously held would become moot, and it would not be able to evaluate its alternatives. Or, furthermore, if a being had always been immortal and indestructible, it could not hold values. For example, it could not be convinced of the arguments in Atlas Shrugged and act upon those ideals, even if it had the same cognitive capacity as you and I. But why not? Okay, now point 2. So, from the conclusion that only a living being can have values, we need to show that life itself is a value. This will not be easy, says Nozick, since we could just as easily suppose death is valuable, and we would not be contradicting anything which was claimed in Section 1. After all, death can only be achieved by the living, but perhaps one could make the following argument, that 1. Having values itself is a value. 2. A necessary condition for a value is a value. 3. Life is a necessary condition for having values. Therefore, 4. Life itself is a value. Nozick thinks it would be absurd to think that just because something is a necessary condition for achieving a value, that necessary condition must also be a value. For example, if getting cured of cancer is a value, then having cancer would be a value as well, since it's a necessary condition of getting cured. Also, one needs some explanation. One argument could be, achieving values is valuable. One must choose between actions to achieve values, and a necessary condition for choosing between actions is having values. Thus, having values is itself a value, but the third step relies on using point 2 as a rule to inference. Also, none of these arguments have yet shown that death could not be a value. Maybe instead of 2, we should have 2 extended. If something is a necessary condition for achieving all values, then it itself is a value. This could still not be enough to discount the death being a value, but even so, it also raises an absurdity. If a necessary condition of achieving values is that they have not been achieved yet, then it would be valuable that values have not been achieved. Nozick then proposes that we consider another argument for number 4, which he obtains from the material which objectivists have written. The argument is that no content can be given to the should statements unless it is assumed as a value. However, it seems should statements could have content if we assumed the greatest happiness of the greatest number is a value, or even death for that matter. Certainly, life being valuable may give the correct sense of should statements, but no argument for this has ever been provided. Instead, the claim was that the only sense of should statements assumes life is valuable, which clearly seems false.
Wow, okay. That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot to kind of unpack there.
It's a lot to unpack, but I think it's super, super interesting because he went straight to the part that mattered the most with Rand's philosophy. And I know that it's I mean, it's dense, right? But
You'll have to send me, did that come from a book or like an article or something?
This actually came from just something I found online with some people talking about objectivism, and this guy just kind of laid it out. I'll send you the link to it, to this thread. This guy just kind of laid out Nozick's argument really, really well, which is essentially kind of everything that Nozick said. But I mean, there's some really valid points made there.
Yeah. And
I think the most poignant one is when he really breaks it down and says, if getting cured of cancer is a value, then having cancer would be a value as well, since it is necessary as a condition for getting cured for cancer. And I mean, really, that shines a spotlight right on top of where objectivism really trips itself up.
Yeah. And I think that really kind of boils down to the whole debate of just where life gets value. And it's really one of the, age-long debates about life and value, what makes a man, what doesn't. And shit. Sorry.
And so No, it's okay. This is exactly where I wanted to take this conversation. And to you guys and to our listeners, I'm really sorry that I had to bore you with that dry diatribe, but so you went to the exact place I wanted to go with it. And so the whole crux of all of Rand's work lies on a base of a subjective moral opinion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because just as Chris said, what makes her then any different from the dogmatic approach of religious faith that she is so quick to wag a finger at?
It really doesn't. In the end, it's still an ism.
It absolutely is, because just as you said, you went straight for the root of it. As you said, you start talking about the value of life, and that's it right there. Exactly. It's the value of life. It's in her work. She assumes the value of life, and it's an objective truth to her.
I honestly don't know. Besides you, Tristan, I honestly don't know anyone who really admires Ayn Rand's viewpoints or considers themselves an objectivist themselves who aren't religious. Like, I don't know one personally. And I know that my personal experience isn't all of the objective wink, wink truth, but it's kind of interesting to note that the assuredness of certain points have things in common with, certain religious dogma or religious teachings, as in respect of the sanctity of life and some such. So,
well, one I don't remember what show. I think she was in an interview, and there was a lady who walked up and started, critiquing her, and she started like going off, saying, "This is my show, and if you came here, you came to listen to me, not you. So quit trying to hijack my show by, seemingly just disagreeing with her." And that was one of the things that made me kind of step back from her whole ideology and realize, okay, she may have wrote this stuff down, but she might not be the actual best person to represent the views. Because one of the things she said, I don't know the quote verbatim, but the gist of it was, if you have a debate with somebody, no matter who wins, everybody learns something from it, and the conversation is valuable. And that's something that I take to heart, is if, right now we're having a discussion and you're able to, propose these arguments against what I have to say, and they're really good arguments and they're teaching me a lot, and I'm going to go, tomorrow and look at these articles and everything and really reevaluate my view on it. And that's good. And that's one of the things that actually kept me stuck to this ideology, which is that even if you do believe these subjective truths, they can always be challenged by this free market of debate. And that's one of the reasons I kind of lost respect for her, was because she really just shut down opposing opinions on her own show. And she never, and like you said, the story where there's her and those other economists are sitting down at a table and it just turns into a screaming match. So that just shows that again, she's just as dogmatic as anybody else. And that's one of the reasons why I don't feel as guilty about trying to bring lessons from, let's say, the Bible into it. Right? Because because recently I converted to agnosticism, as I said earlier. Whenever I was Jewish, I kept a kosher diet. And Ayn Rand would look at that and go, well, you're just a slave of the mind. You're a slave of the spirit because you're not eating what you want, right? But then you could just easily come back and say, well, if it's a healthy diet and the Bible lays this out, is that not an objective truth and in your own rational interest? But then it goes back down to this whole point of her citing herself, I'm right, you're wrong. And then you get into this loop of appealing to authority. And
I think what's most important, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think what's most important is I wouldn't want you to think I'm trying to take it down or anything, but I think it's important to notice, and it sounds like you are, aware of this, and this is great, where these philosophers got it wrong and where they got it right. I think she was, I still can't get that name in comfortably, man. I think she was right about a good amount of stuff. It's just that when it came to being pressed, like you said, obviously, her teeth came out a bit, it seemed.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I'm I'm not taking any offense of this. I'm really enjoying it because I'm still naive. I still have a lot of room to grow. And if one of the whole tenets of her ideology is, being the best rational person you can, then there's a need for this. And so, just like David Hogg, I hate to compare myself to him, but again, I'm just as naive as he is, right? It doesn't matter if I agree with libertarians or not. I still, in the end, don't know everything. And none of us will ever know everything. And that's why I'm really glad that this wasn't just, me coming on and talking about Rand. I'm really glad that you proposed these counter arguments because in the end, it's making me more intelligent and it's sparking more interesting discussion that I don't think.
Yeah, I just like waxing on about these philosophical figures. It's interesting to me just seeing where they were all coming from. Yeah, I agree with a great deal of what Rand says.
Yeah, and
one of the
I want to point out this is one of the problems I've had with just the way modern politics goes out. This is the first time and that I've actually heard a person give a rational argument against Rand. Right? Because normally whenever I ask people like, oh, what do you dislike about Rand? They just say she hates poor people. She's evil. Right? I've never actually heard going down to the root of it and actually coming from somebody who agrees with what she says. And that's why I'm really appreciating this. Is because you just don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's true, man. It's true. Discourse gets really rigid and it gets really tough and it gets hard because people. It's like Chris said at the top. Team sports, man, rules the day in a lot of these. And it's funny. So on this same thread here, I think someone makes a really good summary, basically, of the issues that they have in discussing their challenges with objectivism. Is he says, "I'll make you a deal." If you can, in analytical form, present an argument that you want refuting, someone will take the time to refute it. Because this person basically said, give me some refutations against objectivism.
Yeah.
He said, I want premises and I want conclusions. I want them labeled as such, and I want you to agree that you'll present them in unambiguous terminology. The reason that no one bothers with refutations of objectivism is that objectivists have a really bad habit of moving the goalposts. So yeah, show me the goalposts and I'll bother. Otherwise, it's a waste of my time. I feel this is pretty accurate, but I do want to also place it with, I think people that believe in everything everywhere have a tendency to get it wrong and be a little thick-headed. But it seems like that one is the one that the objectivists like to wear often. But it doesn't sound like that's an issue you run into. You sound like a pretty open-minded guy.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why Fountainhead is so, as a book, is much better than Atlas Shrugged. Because I love Atlas Shrugged because I'm actually into politics and everything. But if I were to recommend a book by Ayn Rand to anybody, it'd be The Fountainhead. Because The Fountainhead tackles what personal, not just everywhere. Because the Atlas Shrugged, and this is one of her criticisms by the right, which is that she's just mean in it. It's not, after a point, it's not just being critical. You're just being. Do you mind if I cuss on this?
No, please go for it, man.
Okay. At some point, she's just being a bitch, like just period. Like there's scene. You've both read it, Atlas
Yes.
Shrugged, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you know the scene where the train crashes and everybody dies, but she goes down and labels why each person's partially responsible for it.
I'm somewhat familiar with that. Yeah, if I remember it correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, that like at that point you're just being kind of a bitch because you're just saying, oh yeah, well these people disagreed with me, therefore they deserve what what came to them. And I think that's kind of what a lot of it came down to. But with the Fountainhead, a lot of it was if you have this attitude of living for yourself, that will get you far. And that's why that book is so. From what I've seen of like documentaries of her, has been so much more critically acclaimed compared to Atlas Shrugged.
I think
Because
just for a second, I want to go into what I know. I've been plenty critical.
Well, then let me say something positive before.
Yeah.
So something positive. It's actually that Ayn Rand's work has actually been represented in other art forms in more recent times. The BioShock games are actually a representation of, from what I understand, they're a representation of how a Randian society would have played out. And with all kind of these weird technological advances, there's even some Easter eggs in it. There's the Fountainhead wine that's in the game. Like it's a brand name of wine in the game. And it's kind of a interesting like Easter eggs and like, someone's interpretation of it. Of course, kind of taking it a lighthearted sense and kind of critical of it. But it's kind of cool to see that Ayn Rand influenced kind of a video game series. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you know the band Rush?
Yes.
Do you know 2112?
Oh, yes.
That's he attributed to the book Anthem by Ayn Rand.
Oh, okay. All right. That's kind of neat.
Yeah, because the entire, how the entire point of the song is he finds like a guitar that's from like the old, planet basically, and he starts playing it, and the elders basically say, no, you can't play that.
Oh.
That's basically, instead of a guitar and Anthem, it's electricity. And that's actually what got me to read Ayn Rand, was because I had to read a book just, my own choosing. And my dad's like, oh, well, he didn't know it was Anthem. He thought it was the Fountainhead. So he's like, yeah, Rush wrote the song based on the Fountainhead. So I got that, read it. Then I read Atlas Shrugged and the Anthem, and I realized, oh no, it was actually Anthem it's based off of. But yeah, that's one of my best. I have to love her because she influenced my favorite song.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, Vinny, go ahead with the negativity.
Well,
Yeah.
no, I was going to actually say something positive. I heave so much criticism, it's probably only proper. But what she really was and what she really did well is she was super disruptive at a time where it really needed it. And she did it in a way that, I know I've slammed the fact that she cites her fiction work as a basis for a lot of the claims she makes. But on the other side of that, the fiction work that she did make is far easier to approach than a lot of this economic stuff. I mean, look, we read essentially what was like a couple paragraphs of some like watered down Nozick, and you guys damn near fell asleep. And I don't blame you, right? The stuff is dry, and the stuff that she's talking about it's the stuff that you'll learn. Well, the broad strokes. Obviously, there's differences. We've talked about that now at length, but the individualism, the freedom, the ability, to have the right to be an individual and do all these things. These are the things that are espoused in all these different philosophies, but this stuff is really dry. So she came with these disruptive ideas, and she packaged it in a way that I feel opened it up to a lot more people than it normally is opened up to. And I feel that because of that, a lot of people got into just liberty overall that wouldn't have otherwise because of the way she packaged it. So I think that's a really good thing is, she came with these really disruptive ideas, and she came and she did it in a way that was more palatable than a lot of, how a lot of other people were doing it. And not a ton of people have done it since. And you got the Tuttle Twins books, and those are pretty rad, but those are, for a younger demographic, obviously. She came with some stuff, some more mature content that isn't just the same dry stuff, and it really caught on, man. It was quite popular there when it first hit.
And I'll play off that. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here right now, because I had listened to the talking points. I knew the talking points of being a libertarian, but I never knew what it actually meant. I never had a philosophy that justified what I was saying. I just, I listened to this guy, I'll repeat him, right? There's no boiling it down. And I was actually in a point in my life where I said I believed these things, but I didn't know why. And so debating was difficult, and just living was more of a chore, right? Like, I don't care what other people believe, but then why not? And then what happened was I read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, and it gave me, and I think this is one of the reasons why I do still call myself an objectivist, despite having the similar critiques to what you guys have, which is that it gives you a sense of confidence, and it gives you a sense of something that, like, Hayek doesn't give. Because when reading Hayek, you really do get the information, right? You get a solid information, but what Ayn Rand came up and said was philosophy is important, and here's a good philosophy to guide you through life. And that's what has gotten me through these past, 2 years of high school. That's one of the reasons why I survived without doing an all-nighter like so many of my peers have, is because I looked and said, well, if I do this assignment now, it's in my own best rational interest. And in the end, I was able to do things, and I was able to actually get up in front of people and I used to be a huge introvert. Like, I would have never come up on this podcast because I would have been too shy. But because of her, I got this sense of confidence in myself, and I have this sense of nothing's ever good enough yet, and I know I can do better, which is why, everything I've done up to this point, it's why I made a Minds account, it's why I speak out, it's why I'm so critical of everything, and it's why I'm so open-minded, because I believe that what gives life value is just learning, thinking, and continuing, and that if you just stay dormant your entire life, you're going to be insecure. You're not going to be proud of yourself, and being proud of yourself is such a key thing to being happy in life. So many people I know aren't happy because they say they don't care about other people, but when you boil it down, their philosophy says you have to, right? That whole group of liberals that I mentioned at the beginning that are, like the new bullies, I feel sorry for them because they're, the philosophy that we all share. It's not just, Randian philosophy, which is just being an individual, working hard, and, living for yourself. That leads to great things, and that leads to actual good work ethic. Whereas if you believe that you're not entitled to the fruits of your labor, when you believe that anybody who works should just have their stuff redistributed, and anybody, that whole idea of social justice, when you believe in this cultural Marxism, you have no choice but to live for other people. And I think she really exposed that well, especially in The Fountainhead, because what she did is she directly juxtaposed a person who lives for himself and a person who doesn't. And that, to me, is why I'm probably still such a huge fan of her. It's not necessarily because I'll be honest, when you listen to those things off, a lot of it went over my head, because I'm a naive 18-year-old. And so I have a lot to learn, and I have a lot to read. I just, my graduation's in 5 days. So I'm still new to this whole libertarian sector. And whereas she has a lot of flaws, I think one thing she did do for me, and this is rubbed off from me to my friends too, which is just give this solid foundation of why you should live for yourself and why you should be an individual. And she showed the negative consequences of it.
Totally, man.
And I think that's the best thing.
And that's a great thing. And to be fair, we could have an episode also where, like, okay, so Murray Rothbard, I'm sure you're familiar with him. If you're not, you should definitely check him out.
I did an essay over him.
Yeah, he's great. And Chris and I both huge fans of Murray Rothbard. At the same time, I don't doubt that we could spend just as much time talking about the stuff that he may have got wrong also.
Well, I kind of did. I was on the Liberty on the Rocks episode where I defended him where he needed defending, and then there are certain things where I felt like he could have come to a little bit better conclusions. So,
And that's really what it's all about, is that none of these people were perfect. And what's important is be able to look at the stuff that you appreciate from it and notice why you appreciate it, and look at the stuff that you think might have been able to be done better. And, Rand certainly isn't above that questioning. But there's also, it sounds like, say, I'm not as familiar with all of her work, but if it's given you the confidence to push through and get through and check out more of this stuff, then I'd call that a net positive.
Yeah, well, you probably saw this on my Minds account. One of the best compliments I ever got was a teacher told me I sound like Ayn Rand. And that's kind of what I'm going for with my life. Is I don't want to be exactly like her. I don't want to preach the exact same ideas because, as we've discussed, I do have criticisms of her and I do have things that differ from her. But I do hope is to espouse the ideas of liberty in a way that she did. Whereas, she wrote books. I want to make movies that show it because and this goes back to what you said, which is she wrote fiction that got people into it. Because you guys have probably heard of Milo Yiannopoulos.
Oh,
yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I went through a phase where I was like a diehard fan of his. Luckily, I'm not in that phase anymore. But one of the things he hit hard, which I agreed with, was the fact that we don't have enough good, entertainment that, is pro-liberty, pro-individual. Everything you see now is just a watered-down version of social justice. And that's why I think we need more people like Ayn Rand who went up and, had their faults, but at least wrote something that got people interested in the ideas. Because, again, so many people are introduced to the ideas of collectivism through TV that they really don't know what's wrong about why, they don't know anything about individualism and they don't know why what they're thinking is wrong. There's so many people who don't know why Marxism is wrong.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That is quite bothersome. But, everyone's going to be into what they're into. It's just I can't say it enough, that team sports thing. People shut down. They don't want to hear new ideas. It's like we talked about at the top, how they're just, shutting things down and they're closing it up. Speaking of shutting things down, we've been going here for a minute. I appreciate everyone's time, but it's probably good we start to wrap it up. Any final thoughts from you, Chris? We'll start with you.
Oh, so my final thoughts is that though a lot of people think Ayn Rand is part of the liberty movement, and definitely her philosophies and beliefs coincide with a lot of the libertarian movement, she herself did not consider herself a libertarian and was very opposed to the party and called anarchists right-wing hippies. So that being said, it kind of goes back to what Vinny said and what was mentioned in the in Murray Rothbard Think Liberty on the Rocks, is that although we have all these philosophers and there are many to choose from that I've commented on the ideas of individualism, free market economics, and capitalism, and mutualism even, and so all of these different philosophers, but and to all take them into consideration, all of them, and including Ayn Rand, even if you find her abrasive, and give her props for where she got it right. That's kind of my final thoughts on that.
Very good. Very good. Tristan, how about you, buddy? Anything you'd like to close with?
Well, I'd like to thank you guys for having me on and for educating me on these things, because like I said, I normally don't hear actual arguments against what she said. I just hear ad hominem. And so I'm going to definitely take a look at these things and reevaluate where I fall. I didn't hear where she said that she wasn't a libertarian. That kind of pisses me off, because
she was way against it. She hated the Libertarian Party.
Yeah. But
yeah, I'll have to look into that, because I'm mainly a fan of her fiction, and I've listened to what Aaron Brooke and everything said. And I guess if I had any final thoughts that has to do with libertarianism, is that I think we do need to come to kind of an agreement on these base values, right? Like individual liberty, free market stuff, and kind of unify the Libertarian Party. because if you have objectivists saying, oh, anybody who's not 100% objectivist is wrong. If you have, it comes from every single side. If you don't believe 100% with me, you're not a libertarian. And I think what we need to do is say, okay, well, here is, you obviously have your own free thought, but if you believe, for instance, the socialist libertarians, that's not a thing. You can't be socialist and a libertarian, right? Because socialism inherently, yeah, but you can.
We'll discuss it another time. That's a discussion for a whole nother day, my friend.
Okay, but the way I see it is you have to kind of define what the party and what the movement stands for. And I think you should try and include everybody in without alienating specific groups of people. But I also think you should remain open-minded to new ideas. I think one of the issues is the libertarian movement's so fragmented into people, into tribes almost, that's why we can't actually get a good going in elections. But yeah, that has to be my final thought, is remain open-minded, but stay true to those principles.
Boy. Oh, man. You got something waiting for you in the Libertarian Party. That's all I got to say. Yeah. I think you guys have echoed some great final thoughts here. So pretty much a lot of the same stuff I would say. I think it's impossible. I think that sometimes too. I think it's important to stay open-minded. I think it's important to notice where people got things right. And just as important as it is to notice when people got things wrong, I think the thing that I'd like to press on is that, when someone gets something wrong, it doesn't mean that it's a reason to discredit everything they've ever done ever. And I think that happens a lot. I think that people go and they pour through these philosophers, and because people become such ardent supporters of people like Rand and people like Rothbard and many others, even Marx, is they look for one thing that they can find that's kind of like, they got this wrong. And then that somehow shatters the entire body of work that goes right along with that one thing. And I think that's foolish. I think it's important to notice where people got things wrong so you can have a better understanding yourself when, like you're saying, Tristan, you go through your life and you apply these philosophies to the things happening in your life. So with that context, it's so important to notice the parts you agreed with and the parts you disagreed with, because that's really going to help you along your way when you're framing these things in your life. So yeah, there's a lot of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I guess, and it's probably not totally appropriate. But we're running late here, so I'm going to go ahead and plug the stuff. You can go to think-liberty.com. You can see all of our articles and other things. You can go ahead and buy a shirt. We like it when you guys buy shirts, so buy shirts. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ThinkLibertyTL. You can find us on Instagram at ThinkLiberty, one word. You can find us on Twitter at Think_Liberty. You can find me on Twitter at ThinkVinny. You can find Chris on Twitter at ChrisOG. You can find Caitlin, who's normally on the podcast but hasn't been in a while, on Twitter at, what is it, Anarcho-Mom or Anarcho_Mom?
Anarcho_Mom.
And then Chris. There you go. And Chris, you've got some platforms. Oh, wait, and I can't forget YouTube as well at Think Liberty TV. And Chris, what about you? You got some other sites there that we're on.
Yep. As I mentioned earlier, we're on Minds at Think_Liberty. And we are also on Steemit at Think-Liberty. And you can view our videos on DTube, which is Steemit's video hosting profile. You can also see Tristan's Minds account. Could you tell us where to find that, Tristan?
Yeah. My Minds, my Twitter account are both just Tristan T. Herring.
Herring like the fish.
Yes, sir.
Perfect. All right. Well, Tristan, thanks again. I really appreciate you coming on. Chris, go and throw him in some of these groups we're in and stuff. Let's talk to this kid more often.
Yeah, I think I need to invite you to about 20 Facebook groups right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I recently started using Facebook again, so that's pretty great.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, on behalf of the guests of the episode today, I'd just like to say thank you for everyone listening. And you guys also, thanks for coming on. Whether anyone likes it or not, we'll probably be back again.